the original word addiction is from the Latin word addictus, and the kind of as the story goes, the word came from the ancient myth of Addictus, which tells the story of a slave who was set free from his master, but because he became so used to his change, he wandered the land with his chains still attached, even though he could remove them at any point. So that's the origin of the word addiction. Now, obviously, it's evolved over time, and in modern usage, we don't really associate it with slavery. But the question we're kind of trying to get at is, how does an addiction alter your free will and your capacity to choose certain actions? So yes, that is the question we're trying to answer.
Yeah, so I'd say pretty uncontroversially generally, even with the etymology of the word, is pretty closely tied to the concept of freedom and non-freedom. And so, just intuitionally, we all we kind of know there is some sort of connection. Like we're quite hesitant to say if somebody who's especially chemically addicted, chooses. I say that with the apostrophe marks, I guess, to shoot up heroin or something. We're much less inclined to ascribe, personal responsibility to him because we feel in some way that his freedom is diminished.
Right.
It does get interesting if we get into how exactly that works because, if we jump straight into it, I think the conception of freedom, which we use, is very important, Not to get too political already in the beginning, but, some political groups will have this conception of freedom that is very very basic, I guess. Well, they just say, freedom, and the only thing they mean is kind of they just focus on the negative freedom from intervention with the government or anything else. And as long as you have that, you're completely free. But I don't think that will tell the whole story of freedom. It misses most of the positive freedom side of it.
Just kind of a technical thing. This is from the Cleveland Clinic. There's two types. There's two types of addiction. There's substance use disorders and behavioral addictions. Substance use disorders are mainly things like alcohol, caffeine, cannabis, hallucinogens, hypnotics, this kind of thing. And the focus here is on how you become tied to this substance and are unable to withdraw from it, so to speak. And then the behavioral addiction is things like sex, gambling,
social media, actually.
Social media, yeah, that's a good example. Things and kind of the consensus is that the addictions are rooted in dopamine hits. So
yeah,
dopamine is the drug, right, that makes you feel good in your brain.
Yeah, to be more specific, it's the reward system specifically. It makes you kind of want to continue, gives you motivation, I guess. So
right,
it's the reward thing, and the reason why I guess it's so addicting is because from the way our bodies are designed when we were good old cavemen, there aren't many easy sources of dopamine. You'd have to work to getting the dopamine, and when you get it, it's like something that's evolutionarily advantageous to you. But nowadays, of course, it's like we can get all this stuff with a flick of our fingers, Well, one you missed in the psychological addiction is obviously food. Food is a big one, eating disorders. And eating food obviously releases dopamine because, we need to eat. But when food, especially high-calorie food, high-energy food, such as sugar, is so readily available, it's a bit of a problem because our bodies are designed to treat this as a rare occurrence when we get sugar because it's supposed to be a rare occurrence. But since we have it so easily, it kind of just overloads our dopamine systems. And but I think it's still like with food and sex, for instance, and all those things. Again, the initial reason for the addiction is because they're things that are evolutionary advantageous. Obviously, food makes it survive, sex reproduces, like that. And I think gambling at least this may not be entirely correct. I might be spitballing, but it's probably the idea that what you stand to gain from it is financial freedom, which is ultimately still kind of a survival thing, at least in our modern times. It's
Well,
just
you usually what happens is they in the initial thing they let you win like a very small amount. This is how you get hooked because you think, oh, it's possible for me to win,
yeah.
and you get that initial like high of winning, and then you keep going, and in reality, it's much harder to win after you've already won, and so you keep on going.
What's interesting in gambling? Sorry, what's
Yeah.
interesting in gambling is that actually it's not, you need both winning and losing. It's not like if you just win, for example, 3 times straight, for instance, you're probably going to stop there. Or at least you're much more likely to stop there because you're like, well, I've already won 3 times. Why am I going to continue going on? But as soon as you add losses into the win, it adds an element of unpredictability, I guess, like ups and downs, you lose and you feel kind of bad, but you're like, oh, okay, I might win the next one, and to keep on going. It's sort of the volatile nature of gambling, which kind of makes it particularly prone to addiction. And I think the same thing applies to social media, I guess. The most addictive thing of our time in social media is the reels, spawned from TikTok, obviously, but they're all everywhere now, YouTube Shorts and Instagram Reels and whatever. But the reason they're quite addictive is because as you're scrolling through the videos, you'll get 1 or 2 good ones and then maybe 3 or 4 bad ones. But you keep on scrolling through the bad ones in the hope of trying to get the good one. Ultimately, like, whoa, that one was good. Maybe if I keep on scrolling, I'll eventually get the good one.
But even in terms of like the like stuff and the story, right? Like you may post one thing and you get like a high percentage of likes, and you're like, oh, I feel really good about this, and then you do it again and you get less, and you're like, oh, then you feel bad, and you do it again and you get less, and then you feel bad, and then you do it again and you get more, and you feel good, and it's that like roller coaster of emotions. And I think the way I see it is really anything can be an addiction so long as you have that high dopamine hit that drops, and so that leads you to continually.
The instant high as well. I think that's an important element of it. It has to be like a kind of instant spike high that you get from like not much work actually. Like sometimes it'll be chance. It might not be easy to get, but still like it's not up to you. Kind of you don't you don't have to put work in to do it to get.
And that's why things like crack are so addictive, because you have that immediate high when you take it, and so you can after it wears out, you lose that, and so you continually seek and crave that instant high.
Yeah. Well, a lot of the addictions, excluding substance abuse addictions, but a lot of the more psychological addictions are also they just act as kind of distractions. When people have anxiety problems, they don't know what they're doing. They're kind of like worried about certain stuff, and they just keep on thinking about it. Just accessing the easy source of dopamine kind of just distracts their mind from it for a brief period of time.
And it's hard for me to think that for the material conditions, and we really have the free will to determine whether we can escape from certain addiction or not.
Okay. And, well, I think here is an interesting point that you bring up, actually, because when you think about things like social media, you think about things like tobacco industry, you think of things like even the food industry, where you have the engineering of like potato chips to basically get you hooked on the taste and make you go
food is
for more and more
as possible nowadays.
Right. I think you bring up an interesting point where when we're talking about like slavery and the chains and whatnot, when you have industries and certain people designing certain things to make you as addicted as possible to these products, kind of making you like a slave to the chemical addiction, let's say, and thereby addicted to the material thing. You are in a sense being like, yes, there's the slavery aspect in terms of, that's a loaded word, but in terms of your own personal free will, how it takes away your own personal free will. But in another sense, you could think about it as somebody else, by designing these things to alter, make you so wrapped up in the chemical pursuit of their products or whatnot. You are, in a sense, a they make you a slave to their products.
And how
Yeah,
would you?
it's very insidious when you think about it. It's like it makes most people enslaved to something, which I think we all can agree. It is a certain form of slavery. You're enslaved to your own mind, in a sense. But they do this without you, most people at least, without them even knowing that they're being enslaved by someone.
I mean, it's like a Foucaultian a panopticon, right?
That the prison thing.
The prison where the prisoners think they're free,
yeah.
but in reality they're completely surrounded and they can't do anything.
But they think they're being watched at all times, which regulates their behavior. Yeah.